This 1899 prison mugshot seemed ordinary, enhanced. Experts found her desperate hidden message. Mary Ellen Doyle was 23 years old when this photograph was taken in the spring of 1899. Within months of this image being captured, she would be silenced, forgotten, and erased from history, or so her accusers believed. This 1899 prison mugshot sat in the Massachusetts State Archives for 124 years. It was catalogued simply as Doyle, M.E. Larceny, 1899. Just another face among thousands of forgotten prisoners. But when archivists began a digitization project in 2023, when they enhanced this image to preserve every detail, they discovered something extraordinary, something Mary Ellen had hidden in plain sight. Something no one had noticed for over a century. By minute 4, you'll see exactly what Mary Ellen scratched into that prison slate, a message so small it escaped every guard, every warden, every eye that looked upon her for more than a century. By minute 12, you'll understand why a wealthy factory owner spent a small fortune to put this innocent woman behind bars, and what she knew that terrified him. And by minute 20, you'll hear the words of her own great-great-granddaughter, who didn't know this photograph existed until last year. What you're about to discover is a story of institutional betrayal, of a powerful man who believed his money could buy silence, and of a young woman who found a way to speak even when every voice had been stripped from her. This is not just a story about a photograph. This is a story about how the truth can survive, can wait, can outlast the very people who tried to bury it. Let me show you exactly what Mary Ellen Doyle hid in this image. Let me show you the message she left for us. The photograph follows the standard format of late 19th century prison documentation. Mary Ellen stands against a stark institutional wall, the height measurement lines visible behind her. She was 5 feet, 4 inches tall. Her prisoner number, 4471, is displayed on a rectangular slate that she holds at chest level. The image is actually 2 photographs in one, as was common practice. A front-facing portrait on the left, a profile view on the right. But look at her face. This is not the face of a hardened criminal. Her eyes are wide, alert, almost defiant. There's something in her expression that doesn't match the context, a steadiness, a resolve that seems impossible given her circumstances. Her dark hair is pulled back severely, regulation style, and she wears the shapeless gray prison uniform that was designed to strip women of their identity, their individuality, their humanity. She was 23 years old. 6 months earlier, she had been a domestic servant in one of Boston's wealthiest households. Now she was prisoner 4471, convicted of stealing jewelry she had never touched. Look at her hands. Look at how she grips that slate. Her knuckles are white. Her fingers are positioned strangely, almost protectively, around the lower right corner of the board. At the time, no one thought anything of it, just a nervous prisoner, just another woman swallowed by the system. When digital archivists at the Massachusetts Historical Preservation Initiative began processing this image in October 2023, something caught their attention. The scanning technician, a graduate student named Marcus Webb, noticed unusual markings on the slate Mary Ellen held. At first, he assumed it was damage, scratches from age, perhaps, or artifacts from the original photographic process. But Marcus had processed over 3,000 prison photographs from this era. He knew what damage looked like. This was different. He increased the resolution. He adjusted the contrast. He zoomed in on the lower right corner of that slate, the area Mary Ellen's fingers seemed to be protecting. What he found made him call his supervisor immediately. When enhanced to 4,000% magnification, the scratches on that slate resolved into something unmistakable. Letters. Tiny, desperate, deliberately carved letters, each one no more than 3 millimeters tall. HELP. And below that, JAS space COYNE. Help Jascoin. Mary Ellen Doyle, in the moments before her prison photograph was taken, had used something, a pin, a small nail, perhaps a button from her uniform, to carve a message into the slate she would hold. A message so small that no guard would notice. A message that would be photographed, preserved, and filed away in the very institution that had imprisoned her. She had hidden a cry for help in her own mugshot. And she had named someone, Jascoin, a name, a person who could, presumably, help her. The question was, who was Jascoin? And why did Mary Ellen Doyle, a convicted thief, believe this person could save her? The back of the photograph bore the standard prison notation, Doyle Mary Ellen, age 23, crime grand larceny, sentence 3 years, date of intake March 14, 1899. Below that, in a different hand, someone had written, good behavior, no incidents. No incidents? A woman who had carved a desperate plea for help into her own mugshot was recorded as having no incidents. The prison records offered little more. Mary Ellen Doyle had been convicted of stealing a diamond brooch and 2 gold rings from her employer, one Harrison Whitmore III, a prominent textile manufacturer. The value of the stolen items was listed as $847, a fortune in 1899, equivalent to roughly $30,000 today. But if Mary Ellen was guilty, why the hidden message? Why the desperate plea? And who was Jas Coyne? To answer those questions, I had to leave the photograph behind and enter the archives. Finding Mary Ellen Doyle before she became prisoner 4471 required working backwards through the paper trail of late 19th century Boston. The city's servant registries from that era are incomplete, many destroyed in various fires and floods over the decades. Census records are helpful, but taken only every 10 years. Domestic workers, especially young women, often moved between households with little formal documentation. I started with what I knew, Harrison Whitmore III. If Mary Ellen had worked for him, there might be household records, servant ledgers, payment documents. Harrison Whitmore III was not a difficult man to find in the historical record. The Whitmore family had owned textile mills in Massachusetts since the 1840s. By 1899, Harrison III controlled 3 factories employing over 2,000 workers. He owned a mansion on Beacon Hill, maintained a summer estate in Newport, and sat on the boards of 4 banks. He was exactly the kind of man who kept meticulous records. The Whitmore family papers are held at the Boston Athenaeum. Among the business ledgers and correspondence, I found what I was looking for, a household servant registry spanning 1895 to 1902. On page 47 of the Whitmore Household Registry, I found her. Doyle Mary Ellen, position parlor maid. Engaged September 3, 1898. Wages $4.50 per week. References: Sister Mary Catherine, St. Agnes Orphanage, Worcester. Mary Ellen had come to the Whitmore household from an orphanage. She had been raised by nuns. Her references weren't from previous employers, they were from the only family she had ever known. The registry continued with routine notations. October 1898, satisfactory performance. November 1898, promoted to senior parlor maid, wages increased to $5 per week. December 1898, commended for service during holiday reception. Mary Ellen wasn't just a good servant, she was exceptional. In just 4 months, she had been promoted and received a raise, unusual recognition in an era when domestic workers were largely invisible. And then I found the final entry. February 27, 1899, terminated, cause theft, referred to authorities. I was about to close the ledger when something caught my eye. 2 entries below Mary Ellen's name was another servant listing. Coyne James Patrick, position, stable hand and groundskeeper. Engaged June 15, 1898, wages $6 per week. James Coyne, Jas Coyne. He had worked in the same household. He had been employed 3 months before Mary Ellen arrived, and according to the registry, his employment continued without interruption past the date of Mary Ellen's termination. James Coyne was still working for Harrison Whitmore III after Mary Ellen was sent to prison. I scanned the ledger frantically, looking for any other mention of James Coyne. And there, at the bottom of the next page, I found a notation that changed everything. March 1899, J. Coyne questioned regarding Doyle matter. Denies any knowledge. Employment continued on probation. James Coyne had been questioned about Mary Ellen. He had denied knowing anything, and somehow he had kept his job. Was he protecting himself, or was there something else going on? The more I searched the Whitmore papers, the more disturbing the picture became. Harrison Whitmore III hadn't simply reported a theft and let the authorities handle it. He had personally funded the prosecution. In a letter dated March 2, 1899, Whitmore wrote to his attorney, "Ensure the Doyle woman receives the maximum sentence. She must be made an example. The household cannot tolerate such breaches of trust. Spare no expense in this matter." Spare no expense. For the theft of jewelry worth $847, Harrison Whitmore III was willing to spend an unlimited amount to ensure a 23-year-old orphan servant went to prison for 3 years. Why? A separate letter, dated the same day, referenced a conversation with Judge Thomas Hartley. Hartley assures me the matter will be handled with appropriate severity. He understands the importance of maintaining order among the serving class. Harrison Whitmore III and the presiding judge were communicating before the trial. Mary Ellen Doyle never had a chance. A young orphan woman, a wealthy factory owner who funded her prosecution personally, a judge who promised appropriate severity before the trial even began, a fellow servant who was questioned and denied knowing anything, and a desperate message scratched into a prison slate, a message that named that same servant. Mary Ellen Doyle had tried to reach James Coyne from inside her prison cell. But why? What did James Coyne know that could have saved her? And why had he denied everything? To understand that, I needed to understand something else first. What really happened in the Whitmore household in February of 1899. Harrison Whitmore III was 47 years old in 1899. He had inherited his family's textile empire at age 31 when his father died of heart failure. Under his leadership, the Whitmore mills had doubled their production and tripled their profits. He was a member of the Somerset Club, Boston's most exclusive social organization. He served on the vestry of Trinity Church, Copley Square. He was a major donor to both political parties, ensuring his interests were protected regardless of election outcomes. The mayor of Boston had attended his daughter's wedding. But the historical record reveals another side of Harrison Whitmore III. In 1894, his mills had been the site of a workers' strike. 14 workers were injured when private security forces broke up the protest. No charges were ever filed against the company. In 1896, a former household servant had accused Whitmore of inappropriate conduct. The woman withdrew her complaint within a week. The Whitmore family papers contain a receipt for $500 paid to her father with a notation, "Settlement S. Murphy matter." In 1897, another servant left the household abruptly. The registry notes only, "Departed, reference declined." Harrison Whitmore III had a pattern, and Mary Ellen Doyle, it seemed, had become its latest victim. The trial records for Commonwealth of Massachusetts v. Mary Ellen Doyle are held at the Suffolk County Courthouse Archive. They tell a damning story, but not the story the prosecution intended. Mary Ellen was accused of stealing a diamond brooch and 2 gold rings from Mrs. Caroline Whitmore's jewelry case on the evening of February 24, 1899. The items were discovered missing the following morning. A search of Mary Ellen's room, conducted by Harrison Whitmore III personally, not by police, allegedly revealed the items hidden in her mattress. Mary Ellen denied the theft. She claimed she had never been in Mrs. Whitmore's private chambers, that she had no access to the jewelry case, and that she had been in the servants' hall with other staff on the evening in question. Here's what the court record does not contain: a single statement from any other servant supporting Mary Ellen's alibi. Not one. Despite the fact that the household employed 17 domestic workers, not one testified that they had seen Mary Ellen in the servants' hall that evening. The prosecution presented only 2 witnesses: Harrison Whitmore III, who testified that he personally found the jewelry in Mary Ellen's room, and Mrs. Caroline Whitmore, who confirmed the items were hers. The defense attorney, a public defender handling his 43rd case that month, called no witnesses. The trial lasted less than 2 hours. The jury deliberated for 11 minutes. Stay with me, because by minute 12, you'll understand exactly what happened in that household. You'll understand why Harrison Whitmore III was so desperate to silence Mary Ellen that he spent a fortune on her prosecution. And you'll understand what James Coyne witnessed, what he was too afraid to say, what Mary Ellen begged him to remember. To understand what happened to Mary Ellen Doyle, you have to understand the world she lived in. In 1899, domestic servants in America had virtually no legal protections. They lived in their employers' homes, worked 16-hour days, and could be dismissed without notice for any reason, or no reason at all. Young women like Mary Ellen were particularly vulnerable. Many came from orphanages, as she did, with no family to advocate for them. They had no savings, no education beyond basic literacy, and no prospects outside service. If they lost their position without a reference, they faced destitution, or worse. This power imbalance created conditions ripe for abuse. Historians estimate that between 1870 and 1920, over 40% of cases involving harm to domestic servants by employers never reached courts at all. When servants did try to seek justice, the conviction rate was less than 3%. But even more chilling was what happened when servants tried to speak out. The most common response from wealthy families was not legal action against the accuser, it was accusation against the accuser. Servants who complained of mistreatment were routinely charged with theft, insubordination, or moral turpitude. Many were committed to asylums for hysteria or moral insanity. The message was clear: speak, and you will be destroyed. Mary Ellen Doyle wasn't the first woman Harrison Whitmore III had silenced, but she was determined to be the last. The Massachusetts State Prison Archives contain notes from Mary Ellen's intake interview. Under prisoner demeanor, the admitting officer wrote, "Calm, maintains innocence, shows no remorse." 3 weeks into her sentence, a second notation appears. Prisoner Doyle continues to claim wrongful conviction, has requested appeal, referred to prison physician for evaluation. That evaluation could have been her death sentence. In 1899, women who persisted in claims of innocence, especially claims that implicated wealthy men, were often diagnosed with moral imbecility or delusional disorder. They could be transferred from prison to an asylum, where they might remain for decades. Mary Ellen knew this. She had seen what happened to women who spoke too loudly. Her only chance was to stay quiet, serve her time, and somehow get a message to the one person who could prove her innocence. She couldn't write a letter, prison correspondence was read by guards. She couldn't speak to a visitor, she had no visitors. She couldn't trust any authority, any system, any official. So she carved 11 letters into a wooden slate and prayed that someone someday would see them. Someone named James Coyne. Mary Ellen's prison record shows she served 14 months of her 3-year sentence. On May 3, 1900, she was released upon review of new evidence. That phrase, "upon review of new evidence," appears only 27 times in Massachusetts prison records between 1890 and 1910. It was extraordinarily rare. It meant someone had come forward with information that overturned the original conviction. But the prison record doesn't say what that evidence was. It doesn't say who provided it. It simply notes her release and the address where she was discharged. 47 Federal Street, Boston, the offices of a lawyer named Thomas Brennan. Thomas Brennan was not the public defender who had failed to mount any defense at her original trial. Thomas Brennan was a private attorney, one of the only lawyers in Boston at the time who took cases on behalf of working-class defendants. Someone had hired Thomas Brennan to represent Mary Ellen Doyle. Someone had provided new evidence that secured her release. Who? The answer was in those 11 letters on the slate. But first, I had to find out what really happened in the Whitmore household, what Mary Ellen knew, and what James Coyne had witnessed. Thomas Brennan practiced law in Boston from 1882 until his death in 1934. His case files were donated to Boston University's School of Law, where they sat largely unstudied for decades. When I contacted the archive, they confirmed that files from the Doyle case still existed. What I found was a folder containing 37 documents, letters, affidavits, witness statements, a complete picture of what really happened to Mary Ellen Doyle and who saved her. The first document was a letter dated January 15, 1900, addressed to Thomas Brennan. The return address was a boarding house in South Boston. The letter was signed by James P. Coyne. "Sir," it began, "I am writing to you regarding a great injustice committed against a woman named Mary Ellen Doyle, who is currently imprisoned at the Massachusetts State Prison. I have information that could prove her innocence. I have remained silent for 10 months out of fear for my own safety and employment. But I can no longer live with what I know. I was a witness to what truly happened. I am prepared to swear to it in any court of law." James Coyne's letter to Thomas Brennan ran to 8 pages. It detailed everything he had witnessed and everything he had been too afraid to say. According to Coyne, in January 1899, Harrison Whitmore III had begun paying unusual attention to Mary Ellen. He would find reasons to visit the servants' hall when she was working. He would summon her to his study on pretexts. to adjust the fire, to deliver messages, to fetch items he could easily have retrieved himself. "I noticed the change in Miss Doyle's demeanor," Coyne wrote. "She became nervous. She would avoid being alone in any room where Mr. Whitmore might find her. She asked me once if I might accompany her when she had to bring coal to the library. I did not understand then why she was so frightened." On the evening of February 20, 1899, 4 days before the alleged theft, Coyne was in the garden shed adjacent to the main house when he heard a disturbance. A woman's voice raised in protest, then silence. "I saw Miss Doyle emerge from the side entrance of the house. She was in some distress. Her collar was torn. She was weeping. I attempted to speak with her, but she shook her head and fled to the servants' quarters." The next morning, Harrison Whitmore III called Mary Ellen into his study. Coyne did not hear that conversation, but he saw Mary Ellen emerge, white as a ghost, and go directly to the housekeeper to request reassignment to duties that would keep her away from the family quarters. 4 days later, she was accused of theft. The documents in the Brennan files make clear what happened in the Whitmore household on February 20, 1899. Mary Ellen Doyle was attacked by her employer. When she resisted, when she threatened to tell others what he had done, Harrison Whitmore III made a decision. He would destroy her before she could destroy him. The jewelry was planted in her room. Coyne's statement notes that Whitmore himself searched her quarters, alone, before calling for the police. The trial was a formality. The judge was a friend. The jury was told to see a young Irish servant girl, an orphan with no family, who had betrayed the trust of one of Boston's finest families. Mary Ellen tried to speak. At her trial, she attempted to testify about what had happened to her. The judge sustained an objection before she could complete a single sentence. Her words were stricken from the record. She was ordered to answer only yes or no questions. And when she refused to stop speaking, she was removed from the courtroom and the trial continued without her. Think about that. A woman was convicted of a crime without being present for her own trial, without being allowed to speak in her own defense. This is what power looked like in 1899. This is what powerlessness looked like. Mary Ellen Doyle had no voice, so she carved one into a prison slate. Why did James Coyne wait 10 months to come forward? His letter to Thomas Brennan explains. "I am not a brave man, Mr. Brennan. I was afraid for my employment, for my reputation, for my ability to support myself. I told myself that what I had seen was not enough, that my testimony would change nothing, that a man like Harrison Whitmore could not be challenged by a man like me. But every day I thought of Miss Doyle. I thought of her in that prison. I thought of the message she had tried to send me, for I learned from a newspaper account that something had been found on her booking photograph, though the paper did not say what. I believe she tried to reach me. I believe she trusted me to tell the truth, and for 10 months I failed her. I can no longer fail her. I am prepared to lose everything to right this wrong. Please tell me what I must do." Thomas Brennan knew that directly accusing Harrison Whitmore III of a crime would be legal suicide. The man was too powerful, too connected. A frontal assault would fail. So Brennan took a different approach. He filed a motion for new trial based solely on the theft charge, arguing that new evidence proved Mary Ellen's innocence. James Coyne provided an affidavit stating he had seen Mary Ellen in the servants' hall on the evening of February 24, the night of the alleged theft, and that she could not have been in Mrs. Whitmore's chambers. Brennan subpoenaed the household registry, showing that Mary Ellen had been on duty in a different part of the house that evening. He produced a statement from another servant, Agnes Murphy, who had left the household in 1897 under mysterious circumstances, confirming a pattern of accusations against servants who had somehow offended Mr. Whitmore. The motion was filed in February 1900. The hearing was set for April, and then something remarkable happened. Harrison Whitmore III withdrew his cooperation with the prosecution. His lawyers filed a statement saying the family no longer wished to pursue this matter and would not oppose a review of the conviction. The prosecution, without its star witness, collapsed. On May 3, 1900, Mary Ellen Doyle walked out of the Massachusetts State Prison. She had served 14 months for a crime she did not commit, but she was free. Mary Ellen Doyle spent 14 months in prison for a crime she did not commit. She was silenced, disbelieved, and abandoned by every institution that should have protected her. But she found a way to speak. She carved a message into a prison slate, trusting that somehow, someday, someone would see it. That someone was James Coyne, a stable hand, a witness, a man who struggled with his conscience for 10 months and finally found his courage. Together, with the help of a lawyer named Thomas Brennan, they had defeated one of the most powerful men in Boston. But Mary Ellen's freedom was only the beginning. What happened next would determine whether this story ended in tragedy or triumph. And the answer to that question was waiting in a wedding registry from 1901. Mary Ellen Doyle was released from prison on May 3, 1900. She walked out of those gates with nothing, no savings, no employment, no reference, no family. The orphanage where she had been raised had closed in 1898. The nuns who had cared for her were scattered across the country. She had only one person waiting for her, James Coyne. The Brennan files contain a brief note, dated May 5, 1900. Miss Doyle in secure lodging. Mr. Coyne has left Whitmore employment. Both advise they intend to leave the city. Leaving Boston wasn't just practical, it was necessary for survival. Harrison Whitmore III had been publicly embarrassed. His lawyers had withdrawn from the case, but the damage was done. The newspapers had covered the reversal, and while they were careful not to accuse Whitmore directly, the implication was clear. Something had gone wrong with the original prosecution. Men like Harrison Whitmore III did not forgive such humiliations. James Coyne had already received threats. A letter unsigned warned him that testimony given falsely will not be forgotten. The Brennan files contain a copy. Coyne had saved it. Mary Ellen and James made a decision. They would leave Boston. They would start over somewhere else. They would build a new life far from the reach of Harrison Whitmore III. I spent a long time thinking about that scratched message on the prison slate. Mary Ellen couldn't have known her photograph would survive. She couldn't have known it would be enhanced by technology that wouldn't exist for another century. She couldn't have known anyone would ever see those 11 tiny letters. So why did she do it? The answer, I believe, lies in understanding what documentation meant to a woman like Mary Ellen. She was an orphan. She had no birth certificate, or if one existed, she had never seen it. Her childhood existed only in the records of St. Agnes Orphanage, and those records were sparse. She had spent her entire life being invisible, unrecorded, unremembered. When she was accused of theft, she understood something terrible. The only record of what had happened would be Harrison Whitmore's version. Her word meant nothing. Her truth would be buried. The photograph was different. The photograph was official. It would be filed and preserved. And if she could leave a message in that photograph, if she could somehow mark it with her truth, then maybe, just maybe, someone would find it. She carved James Coyne's name because he was her witness. He was the only person who could corroborate what had happened to her. Even if she never got out, even if she died in that prison, the message would exist. It was an act of desperation. It was an act of hope. It was an act of defiance that lasted 124 years. Following Mary Ellen and James Coyne after May 1900 required careful detective work. They understood they were being watched, and they were careful not to leave obvious traces. The first clue came from a train manifest dated May 12, 1900. A J. Coyne purchased 2 tickets from Boston to Providence, Rhode Island. The passenger list shows him traveling with M. Doyle. They weren't trying to hide their names, not yet. But they didn't stay in Providence. A week later, a boarding house registry in New Haven, Connecticut shows Mr. and Mrs. J. Coyne taking a room. They had begun using a married name, though they weren't yet married. In 1900, this was a common practice for couples who needed to travel together respectably without drawing attention. From New Haven, the trail goes cold for several months. I searched boarding house records, hotel registers, and employment files throughout Connecticut and New York without finding any trace. Then I found them not where I expected, but where it made perfect sense. In September 1900, a man named James P. Coyne began work as a groundskeeper at the Cathedral of the Holy Cross in Boston. They had gone back. If you're still watching, you already understand what happened to Mary Ellen Doyle, the assault, the frame-up, the desperate message, the courageous witness who finally came forward. What you don't know yet is why they went back to Boston. Why they would return to the city where Harrison Whitmore III still held power. The answer will change how you understand this entire story. The Cathedral of the Holy Cross was the seat of the Catholic Archdiocese of Boston. In 1900, it was one of the most powerful institutions in the city, and it was not controlled by men like Harrison Whitmore III. Boston's Catholic community in 1900 was largely Irish and working class. The church served as a counterweight to the Protestant establishment that dominated business and politics, and the Archbishop of Boston, John Williams, was known for his willingness to protect vulnerable members of his flock. James Coyne secured employment as a groundskeeper on the cathedral campus. The records show that Mary Ellen Doyle also began work there in October 1900, listed as a domestic assistant in the rectory. They were living and working on church property. They were under the protection of the most powerful Catholic institution in Massachusetts. Harrison Whitmore III, for all his wealth and influence, could not touch them there. And on February 14, 1901, Valentine's Day, Mary Ellen Doyle and James Patrick Coyne were married in a small ceremony at a chapel on the cathedral grounds. They had survived, they were together, and they were finally safe. The Brennan files contain one final document from this period, a letter from Thomas Brennan to James Coyne, dated March 1901. "My dear Mr. Coyne," the letter reads, "I am writing to inform you that certain inquiries have been made regarding your whereabouts. A private inquiry agent visited my offices last week, claiming to represent a client seeking to locate you regarding an unpaid debt. I told him nothing, of course, but I advise continued discretion. I should also mention that I have heard troubling rumors regarding the financial condition of the Whitmore textile enterprise. Several of his mills have experienced labor difficulties, and there is talk of irregularities in the company accounts. I will keep you informed of any developments." Harrison Whitmore III was still looking for them, but his empire was beginning to crumble. Meanwhile, Mary Ellen and James Coyne remained on cathedral grounds. In November 1901, parish records show the baptism of their first child, Thomas James Coyne, named for the lawyer who had saved Mary Ellen's life. The hunter was failing. The hunted had become a family. Mary Ellen Doyle had survived the worst that power and wealth could throw at her. She had been attacked, framed, imprisoned, and silenced. But she had found her voice, scratched into a wooden slate, preserved in a photograph, waiting 124 years to be heard. Now you'll discover what happened to Harrison Whitmore III and the justice that finally caught up with him. You'll meet Mary Ellen's living descendants, and you'll hear her own voice, preserved in a recording made just 4 years before her death. Her message was finally received. After November 1901, the trail of Mary Ellen and James Coyne goes cold in Boston. The cathedral employment records show James leaving his position in early 1902. No forwarding address. No explanation, just a notation in neat clerical handwriting, "Departed, good standing." Mary Ellen's name disappears from the rectory domestic staff list at the same time. 1 month she was there, the next gone. I searched every archive I could think of. Boston City directories from 1902 to 1910, nothing. Massachusetts census records, nothing. Catholic parish records throughout the state, nothing. It was as if the Coyne family had simply vanished, as if they had never existed at all. For 3 weeks I hit dead ends. I expanded my searches. I tried alternate spellings. I contacted genealogical societies. I reached out to local historians. Nothing. I was beginning to fear the worst, that something had happened to them, that Whitmore had finally found them, that the story ended in tragedy after all, that the happy ending I was hoping for didn't exist. Then I remembered something from Thomas Brennan's letter. He had warned James about continued discretion. He had advised caution. He had told them to be careful. What if the Coynes hadn't disappeared? What if they had simply stopped using their real names? I went back to basics. James Patrick Coyne. What variations might exist? J.P. Coyne, James P. Coyne, Patrick Coyne, Patrick J. Coyne. In an era before social security numbers, before centralized databases, before digital records, a simple name variation could make someone effectively invisible. And what about location? They had left Boston. They had traveled to Providence and New Haven before. But Thomas Brennan's letter mentioned something else. The Whitmore mills were having labor difficulties. Where were those mills? The Whitmore textile empire operated 3 major facilities, one in Boston, one in Lowell, and one in Fall River. all in Massachusetts. If you wanted to escape Harrison Whitmore III completely, you wouldn't just leave Boston. You'd leave the state entirely. You'd go somewhere his name meant nothing, somewhere his connections couldn't reach, somewhere you could truly start over. I expanded my search to include Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, and Pennsylvania. I searched for every variation of James coin I could imagine. I searched for Mary under her married name, under initials only. And in the 1910 federal census for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, I found them. Coin James P. age 42. Birthplace Ireland, occupation groundskeeper. Address 1847 Callowhill Street. I read it 3 times. My hands were shaking. Living with him, coin Mary E. age 34. Birthplace Massachusetts, wife. And 5 children, ages 8 to 2. They had made it. They were alive. They had built a family. The 1910 census was just the beginning. Once I knew where to look, the documents came flooding in. Philadelphia city directories show James coin working as head groundskeeper at the Fairmount Park Horticultural Center from 1905 to 1928. It was a prestigious position. Fairmount Park was one of the largest urban parks in America, over 2,000 acres of carefully maintained gardens and greenhouses. Mary Ellen appeared in the records as Mary Coyne. She had dropped her maiden name entirely. No more Doyle. No more connection to prisoner 4471. The 1920 census shows her occupation as homemaker, managing a household that had grown even larger. 7 children. Thomas, born in 1901. Catherine, 1903. James Jr., 1905. Margaret, 1907. Patrick, 1909. Elizabeth, 1912. And William, 1915. They had escaped Boston in 1902 when Mary Ellen was pregnant with their second child. They had traveled to Philadelphia and started over. James found work doing what he knew best, tending to gardens and grounds. Mary Ellen raised their growing family. The 1920 census shows them at a larger address, 2234 North Broad Street, a nicer neighborhood, a bigger house. They were prospering. Mary Ellen Doyle, who had spent 14 months in prison for a crime she didn't commit, had become Mary Coyne of Philadelphia, mother of 7, survivor. James Patrick Coyne worked at Fairmount Park for 23 years. He retired in 1928 at age 60, with a small pension and the respect of his colleagues. A 1927 Philadelphia Inquirer article about the park's horticultural achievements mentions him by name. James Coyne, whose dedication to the park's gardens has made them the envy of cities across the nation. The stable hand who had once been too afraid to speak the truth had become a man whose work was celebrated in newspapers. He had built something with his own hands. He had made beautiful things grow. He died in 1941 at age 73. His obituary lists him as beloved husband of Mary, devoted father of 7, and faithful servant of the city of Philadelphia for over 3 decades. Mary Ellen outlived him by 21 years. She died in 1962 at the age of 86. 86 years old. She had spent 14 months in prison when she was 23. She had been framed, silenced, and nearly destroyed. And she had lived another 63 years after walking out of those prison gates. Her death certificate lists her cause of death as natural causes. Her place of death was her home on North Broad Street, the same home she and James had bought in 1918. She died in her own bed, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She won. In 1958, 4 years before her death, Mary Ellen Coyne sat down with her youngest son William and recorded her memories of her early life. William had purchased one of the new tape recorders, a Webker reel-to-reel, the kind that was becoming popular for home use, and wanted to preserve his mother's stories for future generations. That tape still exists. It was preserved by the family and donated to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania in 2019. I listened to it 3 times before I could write about it without crying. Mary Ellen's voice is thin and wavering. She was 82 years old when the recording was made, but her mind was sharp and her memory was clear. "They took my photograph when I entered that prison," she says on the recording. "They made me hold a sign with a number on it, like I was nothing, like I was just a number." There's a pause on the tape. You can hear her breathing. "I took a pin from my uniform. The guard didn't notice, and I scratched a message on that sign before they took the picture. I scratched Jimmy's name, James Coyne, because he was the only one who knew the truth. Another pause, longer this time. And I thought if I died in that place, at least someone would know. At least there would be proof that I tried. I sat frozen, listening to her voice, a voice that had been silent for over 60 years, now speaking directly to me across time. He came for me. Her voice steadies, strengthens. Jimmy came for me. It took him a while, but he came. And I never stopped loving him for that, not for one day in 60 years. She died 4 years after making that recording, but her voice survived, her truth survived. And now, 124 years after she scratched those letters into a wooden slate, the world finally knows her story. Mary Ellen Coyne lived to be 86 years old. She raised 7 children with the man who saved her. She died peacefully in her own home, surrounded by people who loved her. But her story isn't complete without knowing what happened to the man who tried to destroy her. Harrison Whitmore III framed an innocent woman. He corrupted the justice system. He used his wealth as a weapon against the powerless. In the end, it wasn't Mary Ellen who was destroyed. It was him. Harrison Whitmore III did not forget Mary Ellen Doyle, or James Coyne, or the humiliation of having his prosecution collapse in full public view. The Whitmore family papers contain records of payments to the Pinkerton Detective Agency spanning from 1900 to 1906. The purpose listed is location of former employees. The total amount spent, over $4,700. That's equivalent to roughly $160,000 today. He spent 6 years and a fortune trying to find them. The Pinkerton reports, also preserved in the Whitmore papers, show a systematic search across New England. Agents visited Providence, New Haven, Hartford, and New York City. They investigated James Coyne's family in Ireland. They interviewed former servants, former neighbors, former anyone who might have information. The reports are increasingly frustrated in tone. Subject remains elusive. No credible sightings. Trail has gone cold. In 1906, the final Pinkerton report recommends closing the case. It is our professional opinion that the subjects have either left the country or are deceased. Further investigation is unlikely to yield results. Harrison Whitmore III had failed. His money, his connections, his relentless 6-year pursuit, none of it was enough. Mary Ellen and James were in Philadelphia, raising their family, living their lives, 300 miles away, building something beautiful. And Harrison Whitmore III had no idea. While Harrison Whitmore III was spending a fortune hunting Mary Ellen, his business empire was crumbling beneath his feet. The irregularities Thomas Brennan had mentioned in his 1901 letter were real. In 1907, a routine audit of the Whitmore Textile Company revealed massive fraud. Harrison Whitmore III had been embezzling from his own company for over a decade, siphoning funds into personal accounts while falsifying the books. The Boston Globe headline from October 12, 1907 reads, "Textile Baron faces ruin, Whitmore empire built on fraud." The story details how Whitmore had stolen over $340,000 from company accounts, money that belonged to shareholders and workers. He had used the funds for personal expenses, including, ironically, payments to private investigators hunting the very woman he had wronged. Whitmore was indicted on 12 counts of fraud and embezzlement. Unlike Mary Ellen Doyle, he could afford the best lawyers money could buy. The trial dragged on for 18 months. In the end, he was convicted on 7 counts. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Harrison Whitmore III, the man who had sent an innocent woman to prison with an 11-minute jury deliberation, spent 3 years in the Massachusetts State Prison. The same institution where Mary Ellen had been held. The same walls, the same cells, the same dehumanizing routine. His wife divorced him while he was incarcerated. His children changed their surnames. His mills were sold at auction for pennies on the dollar. He was released in 1911, a broken man. He died in 1915, alone in a rooming house in Worcester. His obituary was 4 lines long. The 1958 oral history recording contains one more remarkable passage. William Coyne asked his mother if she ever learned what happened to Harrison Whitmore. "Oh yes," Mary Ellen replied. "I read about it in the newspaper, 1907 or thereabouts. Jimmy brought home the paper and showed me." There's a pause on the recording. "He was crying. I never saw Jimmy cry except that one time." A longer pause. "I didn't feel happy," she continued. "I thought I would feel happy, but I just felt tired of carrying it, tired of remembering." Another pause, then her voice changes, steadies. "But then I looked at my children. Catherine was helping Thomas with his schoolwork. Jimmy Jr. was playing with Margaret, and I realized I had one, not because he lost, but because I had everything and he had nothing. I had a family, I had love, I had a life." Her voice strengthens on the recording. "He spent years looking for me. All that money, all those detectives, he never found me. And I was right here the whole time, living my life being happy." She laughs softly. "That was my revenge, being happy. That was the best revenge of all." The contrast between their endings tells you everything about justice, real justice, not the kind dispensed in courtrooms. Harrison Whitmore III died in 1915 at age 63. He died alone in a rented room, his name synonymous with fraud and disgrace. His obituary doesn't mention his textile empire. It doesn't mention his mansions or his social standing. It simply notes that he is survived by no immediate family. Mary Ellen Coyne died in 1962 at age 86. She died at home, surrounded by 7 children, 23 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. Her obituary runs a full column and describes her as a beloved matriarch whose strength and grace inspired all who knew her. One of them built their life on power, on money, on the ability to crush anyone who stood in their way. One of them built their life on love, on courage, on the refusal to be erased. Harrison Whitmore III has no descendants. His name appears only in financial fraud textbooks and dusty newspaper archives. Mary Ellen Coyne has over 70 living descendants. Her great-great-granddaughter is a professor of criminal justice, dedicating her career to ensuring that what happened to Mary Ellen never happens again. That is justice, not punishment, legacy. Dr. Catherine Coyne Marshall is 38 years old. She is an associate professor of criminal justice at Northeastern University in Boston, the same city where her great-great-grandmother was wrongfully imprisoned 125 years ago. She specializes in wrongful convictions. "I grew up hearing stories about Mary Ellen," Dr. Coyne Marshall told me in our interview. "We always knew she had been imprisoned for something she didn't do. We knew about James Coyne and how he saved her. It was family legend. But she didn't know about the photograph. None of them did." When the Massachusetts Historical Preservation Initiative discovered the enhanced mugshot in October 2023, they began researching Mary Ellen Doyle's history. That research led them to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, which had Mary Ellen's 1958 oral history recording, and that recording mentioned her descendants. Dr. Coyne Marshall received a phone call in November 2023. On the other end was an archivist named Marcus Webb, the same graduate student who had first noticed the scratches on the slate. "He told me they had found something," she recalled. "Something my great-great-grandmother had hidden, something no one had seen for over a century." 2 weeks later, she saw the enhanced photograph for the first time. When Dr. Coyne Marshall learned about the enhanced photograph, she went to her mother's house in Philadelphia. In the attic, stored in a cedar chest that had belonged to Mary Ellen herself, they found treasures. The original 1900 newspaper clipping announcing Mary Ellen's release from prison, yellowed and fragile, but legible. A photograph from 1901 showing Mary Ellen and James on their wedding day. She is smiling, one of the only photographs where she smiles. Letters from Thomas Brennan to James Coyne, spanning 20 years. They had remained friends until Brennan's death in 1934. And remarkably, a copy of the prison mugshot itself. "We didn't know what it meant," Dr. Coyne Marshall said. "It was just this old photograph that had been passed down. My grandmother told me it was the picture taken when Mary Ellen was arrested. We kept it because it was part of the story." She had looked at that photograph dozens of times over the years. She had never noticed the scratches on the slate. No one had. "When they showed me the enhanced version," she said, her voice breaking, "when I saw those letters HELP JASCOYNE, I couldn't breathe." She had been calling out for help for 124 years, and we finally heard her. Dr. Coinmarshall's career suddenly made sense to her in a new way. "I study wrongful convictions," she said. "I've dedicated my professional life to understanding how the justice system fails innocent people and what we can do to fix it. I always thought that was just my academic interest." She paused, looking at the photograph of Mary Ellen. "Now I understand. It's in my blood. My great-great-grandmother was wrongfully convicted in 1899. She spent 14 months in prison for a crime she didn't commit. And somehow, through family stories, through oral histories, through things we kept in cedar chests, that trauma passed down to me." The discovery of the enhanced photograph has become part of Dr. Coinmarshall's research. She is writing a paper about documentation as resistance, how marginalized people throughout history have found ways to create records of their truth when official systems failed them. "Mary Ellen couldn't write a letter," she explained. "She couldn't give an interview, she couldn't trust any official process. So she carved her truth into a wooden board and trusted that someday someone would see it." She looked at me intently. "That's what I do now. I look for the truths that have been buried. I amplify the voices that have been silenced. I'm still doing her work." Dr. Coinmarshall has a daughter named Mary. She is 11 years old. "I named her after my great-great-grandmother," Dr. Coinmarshall told me. "Even before we found the photograph, even when all I had were family stories, I wanted that name to continue. I wanted to honor her." Young Mary Coinmarshall knows her namesake's story now. She has seen the enhanced photograph. She has listened to the 1958 oral history recording, her great-great-great-grandmother's voice, preserved on magnetic tape, speaking to her across more than 6 decades. "She asked me what she should learn from the story," Dr. Coinmarshall said. "I told her, never let anyone tell you that you're not important enough to be believed. Your voice matters, your truth matters, and if they take away every way you have to speak, you find another way." The Coin family gathered in Philadelphia in December 2023 for a special occasion. 73 descendants of Mary Ellen and James Coin came together to view the enhanced photograph, to hear the oral history recording, and to celebrate their ancestors' courage. Dr. Coinmarshall showed me a photograph from that gathering. 73 people, ranging from 3 months old to 92 years old, all connected to a young Irish orphan who scratched 11 letters into a prison slate in 1899. "That's her legacy," Dr. Coinmarshall said. "That's what Harrison Whitmore III could never destroy, all of us." Look at her again. Look at Mary Ellen Doyle, prisoner 4471, in that 1899 mugshot. Look at her eyes, that defiance you see, now you understand it. She was innocent, she knew the truth, and she was about to carve that truth into the very document they were creating to condemn her. Look at her hands, the white knuckles, the fingers positioned protectively around the corner of the slate. Now you understand why. She was hiding her message, she was protecting her hope. Look at her face, that strange steadiness, that resolve that seemed impossible given her circumstances. Now you understand. It wasn't impossible, it was necessary. She was going to survive this. She was going to outlast the man who put her there. She was going to live to be 86 years old and die surrounded by people who loved her. She didn't know any of that when the photograph was taken. She didn't know James Coin would find his courage. She didn't know Thomas Brennan would fight for her. She didn't know she would marry, have children, escape to Philadelphia, build a life. All she knew was that she had to leave a message. She had to make a mark. She had to refuse to be erased. And 124 years later, we finally received that message. Mary Ellen Doyle's story is not just a story about the past. It's a story about power and powerlessness, about who gets believed and who gets silenced, about the lengths people will go to protect their truth when every official channel has failed them. In 1899, a wealthy man used his connections to imprison an innocent woman. The courts failed her. The lawyers failed her. The system failed her. But she didn't fail herself. She found a way to speak when speaking was forbidden. She found a way to document her truth when all documentation was controlled by those who wanted to silence her. She found a way to reach across time and trust that someone, someday, would listen. We have better systems now. We have DNA evidence and innocence projects and wrongful conviction registries. We have social media and cell phones and 1,000 ways to document injustice. And still, every year, innocent people are convicted of crimes they didn't commit. Still, the powerful find ways to silence the powerless. Still, the truth gets buried. Mary Ellen Doyle reminds us to keep looking, to keep enhancing, to keep listening for the messages that were scratched into the record by people who refuse to disappear. Their voices are still there, we just have to hear them. In a prison in Massachusetts in 1899, a young woman held a slate with her prisoner number on it. She was about to have her photograph taken, to be filed away and forgotten. But before the camera captured her image, she took a pin and scratched 11 letters into the corner of that slate. HELPJASCOYNE. For 124 years, that message waited. Through 2 world wars, through the rise of cities and the fall of empires, through the birth and death of generations, it waited. Mary Ellen Doyle could not have known that technology would someday exist to read her tiny scratches. She could not have known that archivists in 2023 would enhance her image and find her words. She could not have known that her great-great-granddaughter would be a professor fighting for the wrongfully convicted. She only knew that she had to try. She scratched those letters with trembling hands, in the last moments before her photograph was taken, trusting that somehow, someday, someone would see. Someone did. We see you now, Mary Ellen. We hear you now. You are no longer prisoner 4471. You are no longer hidden. You are remembered. If this story moved you, I'd be honored if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. History is full of hidden messages, people who found ways to speak when they were forbidden to speak. If you know of a story like Mary Ellen's, leave it in the comments. I read every one. And if you want to see more stories like this, photographs that reveal secrets that have been hidden for generations, subscribe and hit the notification bell. The next video is about a family portrait from 1912 that seemed perfectly ordinary until someone looked at the reflection in the window. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Mary Ellen Doyle would be grateful to know you were here.